RUSIANA from BC 3-I1. So for today we have talked about the Chapter 9 historical background of the policy in the Philippines and legal basis of MTB-MLE. Before we start, we have to know that the learning outcomes of this topic. So after completing this chapter, student is expected to trace the historical development of the language policy in the Philippines, state the legal basis of MTB-MLE. Introduction. So the second part dwells on the legal basis of MTB-MLEs, which is the Kindergarten Act of 2011, Republic Act 10157, mandates the mother tongue as the primary medium of instruction for teaching and learning in the kindergarten level, while the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013, or Republic Act 10533, more known as the K-12 law, mandates the use of the mother tongue as a primary medium of instruction, not only in kindergarten but up to the grade 3. Why MTB-MLE? So MTB-MLEs, the laws and other related documents can shed light on the spirit behind the institutionalization of MTB-MLE to the light of many but consternation of perhaps a few. These legal documents are national and international origin. Next is the historical development of language policy in the Philippines. During the Spanish period, Spanish was the primary languages in schools. So, ang Spanish mo na siya mo na yung gamiton nila sa unang panahon sa itong mga ninuno na to. So, mo na ilang gamiton nila, the way they speak, the way sila mo, the way they write, they have to use the Spanish words and Spanish languages. So, educational degree of 1863, which established formal education in the Philippines, decreed the use of Spanish in school. So, due to an elitist education system, only a few people learned to speak Spanish during that time. So, not all the Filipino just kanang kabaw sila mo Spanish. Pero nayuban di kabaw. So, they have to kanang mo school sila para maka-learn sila of Spanish. So, the 1896 Constitution of Biak ng Bato maintains Spanish as the temporary official language along with the local languages. During the American colonial period, 1898 to 1946, so President McKinley ordered the teaching of local languages in schools, but later decided to require the teaching of English in schools for Filipinos to be taught about democracy and the American system. So, beginning in 1900s, all the Philippine schools used English as a medium of instruction. The use of the Philippine languages was prohibited in schools. So, gamit na ang English sa any schools diri sa Philippines. Pwede na gamit na to ang atong English sa uban na schools. So next is the education under the Commonwealth. In 1935, the Philippine Constitution mandated the adoption of the national language. Tagalog was adopted as the national language, although the intention was to create a new language that should that should evolve from the various Philippine languages, which will be a difficult process. It was only in 1937 the National Language Institute was established under the Romualdez Law, which is the national language law that colonial colonial government began to formulate a language policy that established a national language. In 1939, after years of heated debates about the matter, Tagalog was officially proclaimed as the national language by an executive order. The teaching of Tagalog as a subject became must in all schools in 1940, but English remained to be the primary language of instruction instruction. So the national language based on the Tagalog was renamed Filipino in 1959, and then they were named by Filipino by 1973, which was retained by the 1987 Constitution. Next is education under the Japanese. So in 1942, the commander-in-chief of the Japanese Imperial Forces prohibited by the use of English and the Filipino people's reliance upon Western nations, particularly the United States and Great Britain. So the Filipino language bloomed. It was used as the official language of the country in teaching Philippine history and the character education. So during that time is that English and Tagalog were still taught in school, but Japanese became mandatory foreign language until the end of the World War II in 1945. So it is a constitution under Japan recognized the national language, which is the Tagalog. Next is the 1948 Bureau of Public Schools started experimenting with languages to put an end to the language issue, which is the Iloilo Experiment in Education through the vernacular, conducted by Aguilar in 1948 to 1954. It was showed that learning in the home language puts one at an advantage in the learning of English. So there was a second Iloilo experiment in 1961 to 64, which is the Rizal experiment in 1960 to 1966. In the 1950s, Clifford Prater, a visiting linguist, conducted studies in the Philippines. So these studies resulted to the implementation of the 1957 vernacular teaching policy. The Bureau of Public Schools implemented the revised Philippine Education Program, or RPEP, by making local languages as primary component in the early grades. The same RPEP allowed schools, administration, and teachers to design curriculum to suit the local needs of schools and communities. So, within this context, the revised Philippines education program used the local languages as languages of instructions in grade 1 and grade 2. English served as a language of instruction starting grade 3 and was taught as a separate subject starting grade 1. Local languages were auxiliary languages of instruction in grades 3 and 4, while the national language was auxiliary medium in grade 5 and grade 6. Philippines implemented the Bilingual Education Policy or BEP. So since 1974, when the Department of Education, Culture and Sport or DECS issued by Department Order Number 25 titled Implementing Guidelines for the Policy on Bilingual Education. So this policy signified the use of both Filipino and English in education. So both Filipino, the national language, and English were used as medium of instruction, but separately for the subjects indicated below. This Filipino and English. So sa Filipino, nasa social studies, work education, character education, music, health, and physical education. While in the English, math, science, and technology. So the bilingual policy allowed the use of local vernaculars as auxiliary language until the grade 3. The bilingual policy was revised in 1987 following People Power Revolution in 1986. So, Article 15, Section 3-2, close parenthesis 2, of the 1973 Constitution states, the Batas sa Pambansa shall take steps towards the development and formal adoption of a common national language to be known as Filipino. So, until otherwise provided by law, English and Filipino shall be the officially languages. So, ang kanindyon dunduwa, ang English o Filipino ra jud ang official languages. Dili katong Spanish, dili mag-Japanese, anana. Ang primary o official language nato is English o Filipino. So, the 1987, the 1987 Philippine Constitution resolved the issue on what the national language is. So, the 1987 Constitution retained and further strengthened this policy through Department Order Number 53, Section 1987, entitled the 1987 Policy of Bilingual Education. So this policy aims for Filipino citizens to achieve competence both in English and Filipino. So it states that the aspiration of the Filipino nation is to have its citizens possess skills in the Filipino to enable them to perform their duties and responsibilities as Filipino citizens, and in English in order to meet the needs of the country in the community of the nations. So, gamit jud nato ang English sa laing na lugar. So, the bilingual education policy aims to there are 5 goals of the bilingual education policy. First is enhance learning through 2 languages. Two languages, and next is the propagate Filipino as a language of literacy, develop Filipino as linguistic symbol of national unity and identity, cultivate and elaborate Filipino as a language of scholarly discourse, and maintain English as an international language for the Philippines and as non-exclusive language of science and technology. So as a result, there were two languages used inside the classroom, which is the Filipino and the English. In 1991, the Congressional Commission for Education, ADCOM, was formed. Um, EDCOM advice was all the subject be taught except English and Filipino. So this recommendation was not implemented. In 2004, President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo made a return to English as the primary language of instruction schools. She used um, she used the Executive Order number 210 on May 17, 2003 to establish a policy to strengthen English as second language in the educational system. So, pagkuha ni President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, nabalik ang ato ang English as the primary language na magamit sa eskwelahan nato. Ang English muna atong second language diri sa atong educational system. So, in 2006, Representative Eduardo Gulas proposed an English-only bill in Congress to make English the primary language of instruction of schools. In 2008, Representative Magtanggol Gunigundo proposed a multilingual education bill that called for the use of the local languages in Philippine schools from grades 1 through 6. Congress was divided over these two languages bills and so were stalled for so many years. At issue NEO 74, institutionalizing mother tongue-based multilingual education or MLE. DepEd Order 74 Section 2009 defined mother tongue-based multilingual education or MLE as the effective use of more than two languages for literacy and instruction. The same DepEd Order institutionalized MLA as a fundamental policy and program in the whole stretch of formal education, including preschool and the alternative learning system or ALS. So it means that the learner's first language is used as the primary medium of instruction from preschool to grade 3. Grade 3, in addition to the teaching of Filipino and English as separate subjects. So next is the Department of Education issued DO 16 Section 2012 Guidelines on the Implementation of the Mother Tongue-Based Multilingual Education or MTB-MLE. So starting school year, say Site 2012-2013, the Mother Tongue-Based Multilingual Education or MTBMLE should be implemented in all public schools, specifically in kindergarten, grades 1, 2, and 3, as part of the K-12 Basic Education Program. So the MTBMLE should support the goal of every child a reader and a writer by grade 1. And next is the following 12 major languages or lingua franca were utilized as language of instruction and were offered as a learning area for SCI 2012 to 2013. So first is the Tagalog, Kapampangan, Pangasinense, Ilocos, Bicol, Cebuano, Hiligaynon, Waray, Tausug, Maguindanao, Maranao, and Chabacano. So DepEd did not stop with the 12 languages of So DepEd did not stop with the 12 languages of instruction. In support of MTB-MLE, it is additional guidelines to DepEd that order in number 16 section 2012, which is the guidelines of the MTB-MLE. So in addition to the 8 and 4 other languages, as you can see kanisha. So in addition to 8 and 4 other languages of instruction mentioned in DepEd Order number 16 section 2012, that the following languages that were used as the languages of instruction for grade 1 pupils who speak the same languages in the specified regions and divisions starting school year 2013 to 2014. It's like for example, ano siya kanang mother tongue and other languages man siya Ibanog, Ibatan, Sambal, Aklanon, Kinaray, Yakan, Surigao. So mo niyang mother tongue na ilang gigamit, mo ni ilang languages na gigamit sa lain na region. Like kaning region 2, region 3, region 4, region 6, ARM, Caraga, and so forth. So mo ni mga geographical location kung asa dyan sila, kung asa ning na languages. Like, Tagigaraw City, Batanes Group of Islands, like example, Ibatan. Ang location aning languages sa Ibatan nasa Batanes, inana siya. So, next. So, to top it all, Republic Act 10533, the Enhanced Basic Education of Act 2013, served as imprimatur of the DepEd institutionalization of MTB-MLE. It states that basic education should be delivered in languages understood by the learners as language plays a strategic role in shaping formative years of learners according to Section 2. So, as a matter of policy, the state shall create a functional basic education system that will develop productive and responsible citizens equipped with the essential competencies, skills, and values for both lifelong learning and employment. In order to achieve this, the state shall, among others, make education learner-oriented and responsive to the needs, cognitive and cultural capacity, the circumstances, and diversity of learners, schools, and communities through the appropriate languages of teaching and learning, including mother tongue as a learning sources. So, mo yung pasabot sa states. Aning Republic Act 10533, which is the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013. So, Republic Act Section 4 states that education to be delivered in languages understood by the learners as language plays a strategic role in shaping the formative years of learners. So, for kindergarten and the first 3 years of elementary education, instruction, teaching materials, and assessments should be in the regional or native language of the learners. The Department of Education shall formulate a mother language translation program from grade 4 to grade 6 so that Filipino and English shall be gradually introduced as languages of instruction until such time when these two languages can become the primary languages of instruction at the secondary level. Thus, this Republic Act 10533, the language policy Basic education shall be delivered in languages understood by the learners, as the language plays a strategic role in shaping the formative years of the learner. So, there was an earlier MTB-MLE that related law which was passed a year earlier than our Republic Act 10533. So, according to the Kindergarten Act, Republic Act 10157, the Kindergarten Act states that um, the state shall hereby adopt the mother tongue based multilingual education MTB-MLE method. The mother tongue of the learner shall be primary medium of instruction for teaching and learning in the kindergarten level. So that's all. So for the summary of this topic, which is about the historical background of the policy in the Philippines and legal basis of MTBMLE. So I will dedicate the summary. So the summary of this subject is that historical development of language policy in the Philippines has not been very smooth, from no language policy to one that changed from time to time depending on who was in power. Despite studies that prove that the initial use of the mother tongue as a language of instruction in the first years of schooling was beneficial, the leaders of the country have been divided until Republic Act 10533, which is the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013, mandated that education be delivered in languages understood by the learners, as the language plays a strategic role in shaping the formative years of learners. So, for kindergarten and the first 3 years of elementary education, elementary education, instruction, teaching materials, and assessment shall be the regional or native language of the learners. So, in this history of language policy developed from no language policy to one that is monolingual, then bilingual, and finally, which is the multilingual, but one that is based on the mother tongue. Thus, the term mother tongue based multilingual education, which is the MTB-MLE. That's all. Thank you.